I'm Richard Rodman, a professor of international education at S.I.T. Graduate Institute. I'm here with our Tuesday morning theory and practice in international education class. Say hello, everyone.
Hello.
Yeah, there you see, there are people there. Anyway, we're now engaged. What we're going to be talking about this morning is to orient ourselves around the concept of the matrix and to say a word about the house of 1,000 windows that you've read about. We just had one question with regard to
the diagram.
The diagram of the matrix itself.
Yeah.
That had to do with trying to situate oneself, understanding sort of the complexity and order of that. It's interesting. My challenge, my work has been, I think, to talk about being in development education. I've worked in mobility and international education mobility, and also have worked in research in international education. We talked about this house of 1,000 windows that we're all situated in. Let me see if I can call it up. There it is. Just thinking about how to orient ourselves, and then how to impart the kind of information that we need to know to help us move forward in IE has been kind of a real trick for me. That's been I spent the last few years trying to figure out how can I help others understand or situate this, again, the sea of variables that are out there related to our house of 1,000 windows, and all those variables you saw on the chart, all the field foci that you saw on the chart and so forth. In terms of the house of 1,000 windows, again, we've got researchers, we've got mobility, international student service folks in this building. We've got our development education folks in this building that are operating out of certain hallways, out of certain rooms and so forth. And it is, in one sense, it may feel easy to wander into the work of international education, but actually trying to sort it out and gain useful perspective, not only in research. Again, the matrix is built for research. Yes, it is built for research. Some of the topics that you've talked about this morning in terms of your presentation, we can come back and actually situate them on the matrix. But it is not just about research, understanding someone else's research. It's also about reality. As a practitioner, I mean, I can walk over to the administration building here and look at the structure of the building, look what the functions that are going on in the building and so forth, look at administrators working in international education and so forth, to be able to see, to be able to do analysis with regard to how we do our work every day. So, I guess the easiest way to talk about the matrix is to move right into it here. Let's try this one first. Now again, what I was doing with the matrix is to try to identify the variety of it feels like three-dimensional kind of activities that take place with us at any given time. As you presented your remarks this morning, you talked about, okay, I want to look at, for your paper, I want to look at, let me see, I want to look at U.S. education. I think I want to compare it to Korean education. I think I want to look at the cultural sort of manifestations of how the synergy that these two systems can, we can demonstrate the synergy between the two systems, or we can show the differences between them, culturally speaking. But that's not the only way to look at Korean and U.S. education. Again, okay, having said that, we must delimit, we must figure out, we must make decisions constantly about the kind of work that we're going to be doing to do the very best work. And what the matrix does is simply try to help orient you to do that better. Let's see here. Whoa, that didn't work, did it? So, I think the best way to go about this, you can stop me with questions at any time, all right, about what confused you about this. But as you're doing your work, as you're doing your research, as you're thinking about international education, one of the first things I'd like you to think about is to look at, in this three-dimensional model, is to think about, and as you conjure up an idea for your paper, or walk over to Boyce, or, you know, start a student movement. Think about the IE field focus that you're going to be dealing with here. Now, it's very simple. This axis here just has to do with the field focus that you're going to be dealing with. Informal education, mind you, each one of these constructs are not, this is just a helpful tool. It's not, it is structured and it is organic, but it's just something to use with regard to your work. Now, in the IE field focus, what you'd be doing is selecting what area that you're going to be, you're either reading about, thinking about, encountering in an IE situation. That would constitute looking at formal education, preschool education, primary school education, secondary education, higher education, tertiary education, or non-formal education. Or some combination, right? It's not exclusive. You're not just selecting one necessarily. It's, again, using it helps just be able to understand that, okay, if I'm dealing with S.I.T, graduate institute education, effectiveness and so forth, I'm working in the higher education sector. Just knowing that, just saying it to yourself. Again, it's bringing the implicit to the explicit out in front of you. You can make decisions about that, right? Right? So in terms of Germany, what sort of level would you choose in your paper, looking at Turkish immigration? Or what sort of decisions would you have to make on that axis, do you think? Where would you start?
Well, you'd probably start looking at, they have track schooling. So it kind of gets into, you'd have to look to see if there was a number, you'd have to look at all levels first to decide how you were going to approach it, I guess. You'd see how many started out in the elementary school and then when they got tracked out. So I guess you'd probably focus on higher, like secondary education.
You see her skip around? But you see the intentional activity. Just by choosing that axis, you're going to be forced into making choices with regard to how you're going to look into the matrix with regard to Turkish immigration, education, and Germany at a particular time. Got it? So that's part of the quest here. All right. Now we come to probably one of the most complicated areas that you may found exhilarating and puzzling at the same time. This has to do with what we're calling international education variables, right? And this rascally list here is the menu of variables, and this is not exclusive. This is not, as you see, I've always used the other at the very end of this list because there's always one more variable that has been, ferreted out by yourself or by some researcher out there that is worth looking at in terms of international education variables. If you've read your Kubel and Fossum book, you can kind of see. Kubel and Fossum, they like to talk about issues and themes, right? Along with area studies and some other things. But they've also taken some primary themes that help us understand better what is going on in international education at any one time. This is a list that we've constructed. I've constructed from that and also from some other vantage points too. I mean, we can look at international education in terms of its purpose and mission. When I say, just think about, okay, if we're looking at Germany and Turkish immigration again, you could handle it, you could actually identify, okay, what is the purpose of German secondary education, or what are a variety of purposes, right? So the purpose of education is what? What is the definition? How would you frame that? What's another way to say that? Anyone? Purpose of education. Mission. S.I.T's got a mission.
Training for the workforce, for example, or student, what role would it play for them?
Good, you used a good example on that. Education for the workforce. Some of you read about human capital theory. That's what that's all about. But what they're getting at, education for purpose, is education for what? What's the stated? What is the stated mission of a school? What is the stated mission of a national educational policy and so forth? It is telling us education for what? So, whatever you have in your mind about your international education project, you can actually think about what you're thinking about. Women's education in Bangladesh, right? You can think about, okay, what is supposed to be? What are they saying is happening? What is the purpose of education in Bangladesh? You started out, I think, with that commentary. You were saying there's something not quite right about that. Does this make sense so far? Again, the point is that this whole matrix is in and of itself. This is not complicated, but you have to constantly make decisions. And what we're doing with the matrix here is give you a GPS. It's like a GPS system, a global positioning system, as I said in the chapter, to be able to identify where you are at any particular point in time with somebody that's someone else in the hallway of that house is coming from a different CIES background and so forth, to understand what they're talking about, to understand their perspective, and to quickly be able to give you a matrix that you can run through. This guy's talking about economics here, I think, right? Oh, he's talking about, talking about mission. He's talking about the purpose, what they think S.I.T is all about. And then you can start doing making some decisions to either agree, understand what's being said, or push back, because you have another way. You've got your favorite areas of this matrix, you will find out. All right, policy. Well, you're all taking policy class, and the folks in local residency, you're taking it in this class. They've got a theory and practice and policy. It's all in one course that they're taking. Quality, curriculum issues. Who was working on some of that? There was actually the short-term English teacher in Kenya. One can think about, there's some things that came to mind immediately about that had to do with, okay, who are the stakeholders, right? Short-term teachers, right? In Kenya, working in communities, with partners, in schools, with students and so forth, vis-a-vis administrators, but they're there on a short-term basis. So that's kind of the first thing that came to mind when you talked about Kenyan short-term teachers. Is this making sense? Short-term teachers in Kenya. But you could do it entirely different. You could look at it differently by looking at, okay, how good are these folks coming in teaching in a short-term basis in terms of the kind of curriculum they've either been given, right, or what they are inventing to help improve English. You're talking about English teachers or just teachers in general? Yeah. See? There's 2 or 3 different ways to look at the same kind of situation. There's emphasis there. Just knowing it, just being able to see it. I tell you, you need to be carrying it. I'll hand these out. You can fold them up. You can carry them around your back pocket. Anytime you can get them out. Let's see, what are you talking about? No. Ideas of quality. I would say, what did I see here? CIES, this is the Comparative International Education Society's journal, the hard copy. You see it online, but I've got a whole shelf of these at home or in the office here. Comparative Education Review, that's what you read your book reviews out of. This is, what is this? This is May 2012. Here, you can do the same sort of analysis with regard to what you put up here or up on the matrix in terms of variables just by looking at the title and see whether you even want to read the article or not. Here's one, just off the cuff. Understanding the Chinese superintendency in the context of quality-oriented education in China. So they're talking about understanding the Chinese superintendency in the context of quality-oriented education. Well, that doesn't float my boat, but I know what that is. But I can also see it's about China. It is about, it's probably about hierarchy when we're talking about Chinese superintendency. It's probably talking about primary and secondary schooling, I would imagine. Does this make sense? So I've got it pinned down. It's probably about primary, secondary schooling. It's probably about hierarchy and authority. And it talks about in the context of quality-oriented education. That's the title. So they're speaking to some variables there that they believe that relate to quality and all of that. All right, well, you get the idea. So accountability, we'll be talking about that in the coming weeks. Resources, you can look at any sort of educational operation in terms of needs, right? What students need. You came here because you need something. You came here because you read our purpose, our mission. We said we're going to do something. We have a value-based experiential education and international education that will provide you the kind of training that will equip you to become an international education leader. That's what we say. Now, you can do a whole analysis of S.I.T. based on the kind of resources you've seen that we've got. Have we got the stuff to do it? Where's my smart board? Well, anyway, here's my smart board right here. Sort of thing. So, and you could actually do an analysis, you see what I'm saying, with regard to the kinds of resources that are available to match up with what we say we do. Access, we're going to have a lot of fun with that. I think some of you are already working on that. It's always about access. Coming to S.I.T. almost by definition is like, who is getting the education? Education for whom? Purpose, education for what? Access, opportunity, education for whom? Education for the 1%, education for the legions of folks that are out there that need education and so forth, education in a non-formal setting, in Guatemala, indigenous education, in the co-ops and so forth, or in the primary schools of Germany. Equality, same thing, social justice issues, Bangladesh, I think that's, you're looking at Bangladesh and you're talking about women's education. There. Let's see, teacher training, of course, technology, environment. Anyway, is this making better sense with regard to isolating it? You're not doing it all. But walking into any sort of educational kind of situation, you've got to figure it out. You've got to think, this may not be the tool for you, but you've got to be able to think clearly to understand who's in the room with you, or who's coming to your room, or what room you're visiting, down the hall in that house of 1,000 windows. Make sense? So that this is what this is all about with regard to kind of the triangulation to figure some of this out here. Any questions about that? Becky, you like it?
Yeah.
Isn't it great?
Great.
Right. And there's a straight line that goes with it too. Sort of thing. No, that's good too. All right. Let's go to the next one here. Oh, there we are. So, the other thing to think about, okay, this is where you start getting into the three-dimensional sort of look of the matrix as well. We may be talking, okay, we're talking about primary schooling in Germany, we're talking about access of Turkish immigrants and so forth, and probably other things that are going to be lighting up curriculum, why are they there, why are they not there, and so forth. You can also then start, you need to identify scope with regard to your look. What are you going to be doing in terms of scope when we're talking about Germany and Turkish immigration, do you think? Let's see if we can keep it there.
Well, I was thinking of not looking at the entire nation. I thought that would be a bit much. I was looking at the area I was more familiar with, so I was thinking more like the region of southern Germany. But
that's because it's a federal republic. They've got different systems. Germany, because they've got different systems around Germany. So to say one thing about the German educational system might be a little difficult around that. So the point is, again, implicitly you may have an idea how this is working out for you in terms of your research or who you're talking with, but you need to be looking, ascertaining explicitly, am I making, how powerful, how broad a commentary am I looking at here, right? Am I looking at a rifle shot of student development learning, your student development learning, our work together, right? That's very micro, right? Sort of thing. As opposed to looking at how S.I.T. does its work organizationally, terms of purpose. Or S.I.T. situated into the Vermont system or experiential education schools. How does it compare with other experiential education schools? Or S.I.T. in terms of purpose, this value that we have in terms of social justice and so forth, does it have an impact on the international stage? You see? So what we're looking at here is simply just selecting scope. Simply selecting the kind of scope that you'd be looking at. Maybe a case study. Maybe a case, Dana, you need a case study. We'll just do a case study right here. Maybe a comparative case study. Maybe an entire class. Again, just being able to ascertain explicitly scope gives you, allows you to move forward with your work or understand what you're reading. What have we got here? Here's another one. Transnational private authority. This is again out of the Comparative Education Review. Transnational private authority in educational policy in Jordan and South Africa. The case of Microsoft Corporation. That's a tough one. Transnational private authority in education policy in Jordan and South Africa. The case of the Microsoft Corporation. How would you situate that? What sort of commentary might you make around that? What are some of the things that light up? See, you can almost see them light up here. It's what lights up. What are you hearing here that lights up for you? Transnational private authority in educational policy in Jordan and South Africa. The case of the Microsoft Corporation.
So in the scope, it would be global?
Could be, yeah, because it's transnational. If you read Richard Lambert talked about area studies, but also he talked about the transnational phenomena. It's like globalization. We're into one another's business. So good. So that lit up. What else lights up for you?
Stakeholders.
Stakeholders?
Microsoft is obviously a stakeholder in this situation, influencing it somehow.
Very good. So you're looking at a private corporation as a stakeholder in this. Very good. So that lit up for you. Good. You see how this works? It does work. What else is lighting up for you? Yeah.
Equality.
Equality.
It would be different in South Africa versus what was the other stuff?
Okay. How it's landing.
Yeah.
How private it's. Certainly you've got policy. They're talking about educational policy explicitly here. Then they're talking about there's still mysteries of what's going on in that particular study, but you get an idea that you can kind of situate where this person's coming from. Wait till you saw this side of remember this side? We're going to get to in a minute, in a little bit. This is where, what are they going to say about it? Is it going to be a neo-Marxist sort of orientation around stakeholders and is it going to be a structural functional sort of orientation around it? That's kind of the mystery. We don't know contained in this particular title what's happening here. But anyway, so all you're doing here is doing some triangulation on terms of scope. Clear enough? Got it? You can do that. Yes, we all can do that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, the next thing, of course, here, this is what we're going to be spending the rest of the morning on, is our windows and our lenses. And I think last week I actually quoted, I had this little piece up on the board, and I attributed it to Mark van der Ven, a Dutch author that talks about, in fact, that was sort of the inspiration for taking a piece here. I'll get to Roland Paulston. I think in reading the article, the chapter, you saw that it was the entire book. This book is actually kind of honoring Roland Paulston, who's a social cartographer. Myself, I also fancy myself a bit as a social cartographer because I do a lot of visual work, you'll notice, associated with some of this. But anyway, Mark van der Ven did something like this, and what this just represents, these windows represent the windows of the house you're looking through, onto the world. As we said, looking at S.I.T, we can look at S.I.T out of this window, which looks like a parking lot, and S.I.T that looking out these windows back here, S.I.T looks like it's got grass and it's got at least one air conditioner and a red building out there. So This is similarly, what you're doing is looking through one of these windows, or a combination, again, it's not exclusive, a combination of windows here with regard to all those things that are situating yourself in terms of the commentary that you're after here. You can look through a historical window, a cultural window, a political window, economic window. I mean, some of this is pretty obvious. You do it. But just naming it, naming those windows, labeling them, is going to help you. Who's doing the cultural? Who's doing the cultural studies up here?
Me.
What were you interested in doing?
Education is a reflection of culture, so why education system in a collectivist culture, specifically the Korean culture, will not work in the USA.
Okay, so let's just wander around here to see what sort of field focus would you take, or is it going to be more esoteric?
Secondary.
You're going to take secondary, all right, and what sort of scope?
I don't know.
You're looking at least at Korea and the U.S., is that right?
As a nation or
So
globe?
it may be nation, right? This becomes interesting. It may be, you may actually be making commentary on meso-level organizational sort of stuff that's happening between the two countries, but it helps situate you that way. And then in terms of variables, what do you think you're going to run into?
Culture, policy, curriculum, perhaps.
Right. But anyway, you'll see you're going to be able to dive into that kind of material looking at the U.S. And Korean educational system. First and foremost, what interested you is the cultural piece, right? That you actually named the window. She named the window before she named what's going on this side of the house here, right? On this side of the matrix, which is fine. Knowing that allows you to do some work around ascertaining which of these will light up for you. That provides what it looks a lot like, what looks like Korean and U.S. education, what looks different, or what's obstructing one from the other, and so forth, the values. Is this good? Everybody got that?
So you can choose more than one variable.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. The thing is that you'll know once that argument starts to get muddy. Well, yeah, we got stakeholders happening here, and we've got teacher training happening there. We got authority happening here. We got bad communications happening there. You're running into a book. You see what I'm saying? You see that each one, dealing with each, you start compiling all of these variables and so forth, or you're listening to someone talk about these variables. Wait a minute. It starts to sound like you're just asserting information about what you think you're seeing and not really doing explanational work. Does that make sense? Just knowing that. I certainly do more than one level of variable analysis and so forth. But just knowing what's lighting up for you helps you know, wait a minute, I bit off more than I can chew here. Or I'm listening, this author's full of rubbish because he's talking about all sorts of things only, it's a mile wide and an inch deep. Does that make sense? With regard to observations. As we pointed out last time, probably some of these writers don't write very well. I mean, just because you're reading someone that's gotten published, I hope you didn't say that about this, but maybe, anyway, is that it's, some folks just have not thought their work through very, very clearly, or not able to express themselves very clearly. So know that. But again, the matrix will help you in terms of kind of situating, wait a minute, what is he really saying? What is she really saying about some of this? So far, so good? All right. Wish I had a little bit more here. And this is what we're going to be spending the rest of the day on, is ascertaining how ways of seeing the same phenomena. Again, going through the field focus, you may be looking at higher education in a couple different countries in terms of technology on a regional level. Higher education in South Africa in terms of technology in the region, urban versus rural areas and so forth. The next thing is then, okay, what sort of lens are you going to put on that? That's where the action is. Technology, South Africa, rural and urban areas, white and black areas in South Africa. Who's got technology? Who has access to technology? Who doesn't get technology? What does it mean in education? Got it? Sort of thing? A structural we'll talk about this in the second half of the period. A structural functionalist would just be telling us about how that works, what that looks like in South Africa. In fact, the structural functionalist may be talking a little bit, remember the 3 T's, transmission, what were the other 2? Education for transmission, education for what? Education for transformation, what was the third one? Education for transition. Transition meaning a sense of progress, right? So structural functionalists might, talking about technology, South Africa, rural and urban areas, as a structural functionalist may be looking at education for transition, how to improve technology, right? What it looks like, spatially. Someone looking at education for transformation, that's looking through a critical theorist lens, or a feminist lens, a deconstructionist lens, a conflict theory lens, dependency theory lens, might see what? Do you think? In the same area of the matrix that has been lit up there. What might they see? What?
Oppression.
Yes, injustice, oppression. That is an entirely different article. That is an entirely different critique, right? Now you know these things when you see it and when you read it, but knowing that there are different ways to look at the same phenomena is really, really important. And the matrix just helps situate that. Is it becoming more appealing than it might have a place in your back pocket? It might have a place in your back pocket. Anyway, okay. One final thing and then we'll get to... Oh. Does anyone have any questions? I got this thing, I'll walk it up, I think. There it goes. Oh, there was the rest of it. See the little guy, put the little man on there and everything? Oh, this thing's just behaving slowly. Back to reality then. We talked last time about what exactly are we doing here? Again, making the implicit explicit. What we're doing is you're working with conceptual frameworks, okay? If there's ever a conceptual framework, there's one right there. Made of wood, you can take it home with you, sort of thing. That can fit your back pocket. Conceptual frameworks, they're structured from a broad set of ideas and theories that help you properly identify the problem you are treating, frame your questions, and find the literature, finding the right kind of bibliography. So, if you're doing South Africa, technology, rural areas, urban areas, you're identifying as a structural functionalist, you're showing the differences. As a conflict theorist, you're talking about, okay, the problem is that there's no access here, it becomes an access issue, and you start framing your questions differently. And you start finding literature. I talked about going back to the bibliography, remember? And you read something, go to the bibliography, see who he's reading, see who she's reading, and so forth. That's what you're doing. You're trying to find a literature that resonates with your position, and so forth, that expands your position, or looking at something that is opposite. Looking at an opposite, what's the pushback with regard to what you've had to say? Justice issues have to do with an infringement, maybe have an infringement, has a commentary about neoliberal society, free economic society. Suddenly there's an economic lens that comes into that, or window that comes into that. Okay, and let's see if I got one more here. This one you've seen before. I'll hand this out, but this is an example of let me see, did I do this one too? Yeah, this is an example, and I'll hand it out. I think it was mentioned in the chapter, but this was my work when I was in Lesotho. I was in Lesotho. I was doing community work, development education work with communities and so forth. My study, I wanted to find out why was the World Bank failing and we were succeeding in these grassroots educational development projects and so forth. And very simply, what I did is my field of focus was the primary schooling, the primary school area, okay? And I was very interested in the stakeholders. I was interested in the community at the time, the leaders of the villages and so forth that were involved in a school construction project. When were schools going up and when weren't they going up? Okay? Why were they going up? We'll get into that when we start talking about development education. Very interesting what took place. So I was looking at the stakeholders. I was looking at the Ministry of Education right on down to the community members and students themselves. I was looking at the community level in this project. I was looking at the resources that were available, which actually became very dynamic. What was the community? What was a community that had very few resources? What resources did they have? Once we talk about development education, I'll expand on what I'm talking about here. But in Lesotho, most of the men in that country at the time were in the South African mines. They weren't even in the country. Communities I was working in were filled with women and old people and children, sort of thing. But my point is that to look at the human resource side in this study.